everyone. I want to thank you for joining the PERCoGS panel discussion about PR careers for the summer APT meeting. In this session, I'm pleased to introduce our panelists who will share their experience navigating in PR in academia. So today we have with us Dr. Danny Caballero, an associate professor at Michigan State University, Dr. Clausel Mathis, a postdoctoral scholar at the University of Washington, and Dr. Lisa Goodhue, an assistant professor at Seattle Pacific University. Danny, Clausel, and Lisa, thank you for accepting the invitation and for being here with us today. So before we dig into your current position and what you do, could you please take a moment to introduce yourself? Like, what would you like the audience to know about you or your academic background? I don't know, whoever wants to start first.
I mean, I can go first. I'm currently a postdoctoral scholar at the University of Washington, Seattle. I work on two projects, one with conceptual resources, where I'm looking at mechanistic reasoning of students' responses that are from resource-oriented materials. And I'm working on an energy and equity grant where we are working with high school or secondary physics teachers in trying to help them teach energy ideas more equitably. And so that's where I'm at right now. I don't know how else to explain. So let me go to the next person.
I can go next. Yeah, my name's Lisa Goodhue, and I am an assistant professor at Seattle Pacific University. And I also work closely with Clausel on the Conceptual Resources Project. So my current resource is trying to understand, my current research is trying to understand kind of what are the really great ideas that students have about physics and how can we leverage those in the classroom to help them build more sophisticated scientific understandings. And a lot of my work right now is in developing instructional materials like worksheets or clicker questions or something like that, that kind of help bring those out. And then looking at the like instructor and TA preparation side of like, what kind of support do folks need in order to teach in a way that leverages students' great ideas.
Cool. I'm Danny. I'm a faculty member at Michigan State. I've been here 8 years now, and I am one of the PIs of the Physics Education Research Lab, and I also am in the Department of Computational Math, Science, and Engineering, and I am one of the PIs of the Computational Education Research Lab. So most of the work that I do is focused on aspects of computation, whether that's working it into classrooms, how students understand it, what kind of support systems and structures are needed for it, et cetera. But I also do quantitative analysis using computational methods. So some of the research I do that's quantitative is mostly focused on like machine learning and data science kind of techniques.
Great. Could you please explain a little bit about what aspects of your current position do you like the most, and to what extent is your job oriented around work-life balance?
Well, for me, what I like about the job is, well, one, I like the people I work with. I like working with the PIs. I like working with Lisa. I like working with everybody in the group. They're all very supportive. And what else? What was the other part of the question? I'm sorry, I forgot. I apologize. My list of questions is left to me.
To what extent is your job oriented around work-life balance?
It's oriented well. I'm working remotely, and I live in Tallahassee, Florida right now. And obviously I'm at the University of Washington, Seattle, so they're far distance apart. But I'm able to have a work-life balance somehow. I just had a child. Me and my wife, we just had another child. And so we've still been able to navigate that. And we have a 5-year-old, or 6-year-old, excuse me. We have an older one who's 6 years old. And so we've done well. We're both working at home, and we're able to still function in our jobs. And be productive and still, you know, have fun. And so, so it's working well for me with the postdoc.
I can go next. So I like a little bit of the structure of my position is I work at a really teaching focused university. And so a normal faculty load would be mostly teaching and then doing a little bit of research on the side or in the summer. But my current position, this is my first year. And so at least coming in, I have been 50% research and 50% teaching, which means I'm teaching one class and then doing research for the rest of my time. So it's a little bit more like an R1 university type load. Although like I've never been a professor at an R1 university, so there's probably a lot of things that are quite different there. I am not, one thing that's very different is like I am not responsible for always funding part of my salary by getting grants. That's definitely an option for me, but if I don't do that, I can choose to just teach more. And I really like that about the position. At the moment, though, I do really like having research space and time. That makes it feel like a little more varied, sometimes too much, but mostly the variation is good. And I also, like LaSalle said, I really like the people I work with. And I really love being able to live in the Pacific Northwest as well. How much is my job focused around work-life balance? I think our research team and my department has been really great about setting expectations that we should, you know, work for work-life balance, I guess. But the thing I've realized in the last year is like, it can be a lot of work to actually protect your personal time. And it's not because other people are like trying to make you work all the time, but just nobody knows all of the things that you've got going on except for you, especially in this remote environment. And so I have realized what a task that can be to actually make that happen.
Yeah, so I'm at an R1 institution, and there's no work-life balance in terms of the messaging as far as it goes from the college. I mean, it's sort of there, but that's not what it is, right? You get tenure for producing publications and for generating grants, and so a lot of the work-life balance is something you have to do on your own and decide on your own, because there's not much real support, and there's not much there's not real messaging around like you should be doing these kinds of things to make sure you're, you know, taking care of your mental health, or that you're taking a break, or no, that's not the case. So my relationship with work and life has changed substantially over the 8 years. Part of that is just getting better at doing my job and getting more efficient and knowing what things to participate in and what to not participate in. Part of that is getting tenure and not caring anymore about things that I don't need to care about. Then the other part of it now is like it's demanded of me. So I'm at home. I mean, y'all probably saw one of my kids running around. I have 3, and I am home with them all the time. My partner is an overnight nurse at a hospital down the street, and so you know, she's kind of out of commission 4 days a week or so, you know, sleeping. So yeah, increasingly more time spent with them, which is great. So I guess I would say like over time I've gotten better at this idea of work-life balance, but it's been entirely an effort of sort of my own making, like realizing that this is something I should do, and then trying to figure out, I think a lot of what Lisa said, like trying to figure out like what are all the things you're responsible for, and then how do you decide to sort of manage that? Because at least at my institution, no one's really going to help you do it for you, right? You've got to think about it yourself.
Can you describe a little bit what has been your trajectory in PER? What education, jobs, and formative experiences have led you to where you are now?
Well, for me, I was originally I was in cellular and molecular biophysics sometime around 2010 13-ish, and I really didn't like the project I was doing. And so pretty much the long story short, I stopped doing it. And then I started teaching high school, and I really enjoyed it. High school physics, I really enjoyed it. And I wanted to go back to grad school. And, I decided to say, okay. I said, well, let's try education. I didn't really know much about physics education at the time. And I didn't really even know barely it existed. And so I did some research, and I decided to go to Florida State for my PhD. And then from there, enrolled in the courses, developed the project, and I started going to the AAPT conferences, and then started networking with people. And from there, I was able to get the position I'm at now at the University of Washington. Ironically, I met Lisa at the conference. Ironically, I met Lisa at the Winter AAPT conference, and just talking about the project that they were working on, and I knew there was a position open. Having a great conversation with her was really what kind of convinced me to really want to pursue working with this group, and it's been a great experience. And so I would say that's kind of in a short statement my trajectory in PER.
So for me, I was an undergraduate at Seattle Pacific University, where I work now, and there are a lot of faculty who do PER, and so that was my first exposure to this kind of field of study. And I had an REU as a college student at the University of Colorado. It might have been right after Danny graduated and left. And so I got a little bit of research experience in college, and kind of was, this is pretty fun. And then did a couple of other research experiences in regular physics as well. And then decided I wanted to go to grad school, and wasn't totally sure whether it was going to be physics education research or something like biophysics or something. Clausel, I totally didn't know that you did that, so that's cool. And then after spending a little time in a biophysics lab, I was like, actually, I think people are a little bit more interesting to me than E. coli bacteria, basically. And so then I did my PhD at the University of Washington, and then was my job search process was weird because it happened right as COVID was becoming a thing, and I had initially accepted a job at SPU as a one-year postdoc, and then somehow in there it became a tenure track position, and so my ending up here is relatively opportunistic, and I'm really happy about it. It's great, but it wasn't exactly the thing that I set out to do initially. So, yeah.
So I grew up in South Texas, and went to the University of Texas at Austin for undergrad. And while I was there, I was doing mostly astrophysics research. I was doing data reduction for comets, and then I worked in the there's a nuclear facility near the campus, and I worked in the machining team on there as well. And so I was looking at going into experimental physics of some sort. And so I ended up at Georgia Tech because they had a nonlinear science program that I was interested in. And I started doing that kind of research. So I was, building apparatus and running experiments and taking, data with laser interferometers and stuff like that, right? Just all the technical stuff you do in an experimental lab. And around my third year, I just became really uninterested in what I was doing. My PhD advisor took three of us on at the same time, and so he kind of rotated the funding hat a little bit. So I TA'd a lot. During the summer, he would have me help him do professional development with teachers because it was something he was interested in, and that would pay for the whole summer for me to do research. So I only had to help him for a week. Eventually, I started running those for him instead. Hold on, kiddo. Sorry. It turns into pink. That's awesome. Sorry. She apparently she's coloring, and there's something's turning into pink, and it's fascinating. And I'm not there to witness it. So right. So anyway, so yeah, so I went and talked to my advisor and basically said, like, I don't know that I'm going to continue doing this. I'm going to try to find something else to do. And so at that time, it turned out he had gotten an NSF grant from to sort of incorporate a new curriculum which had computation in it, and he had just hired a postdoc. And so he said that I could potentially, do a PhD with that kind of focus, because we had talked about sort of all the things I was interested in, which was like going and teaching high school. So we ended up shifting my research entirely for the last 3 years I was there. I did some studies there with computation. I went and did a postdoc at Colorado. That postdoc search was wild because I had a bunch of different jobs that I applied for, including working at two-year colleges, working at a private high school. Georgia had emergency teacher certification. So if you had a master's degree, you were effectively certified. So I thought about teaching public high school. But I landed on the Colorado job because I wanted to continue in a college environment, and they took me up to the 11th floor when I interviewed, and you could see all around to Kansas. So that was sort of
very amazing up there.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. And then I applied for faculty positions after 2 years there, and I had two choices: upstate New York or mid Michigan. Neither of which sounded like attractive places to live, but Michigan has grown on me significantly over the last 8 years. It's a beautiful state.
Yeah, me too. I love Michigan now that I'm far from there. So Danny, you touched that area a little bit, but I just wanted to see if other people have some experience too, some aspects to add there. What has been your experience in applying and finding for jobs in PER? And did you ever consider exploring other career options outside of academia? And Danny, feel free to add more on that if you also have.
Yeah, I can start maybe by adding just a little bit. That's okay, Diana.
Yeah.
So after grad school, I mean, I was really kind of just lost. I didn't know what I was going to do. So I was applying for lots of different kinds of jobs, and those were jobs that were both sort of in the academic sector in terms of postdocs, but they were also in the teaching sector. And I didn't apply for industry jobs or, like working for ETS or something like that. I wasn't really interested in a corporate environment myself. I wanted something that involved students. And so either that was something that would involve me directly teaching them in some environment, or it would involve something related to that. And so that, to me, sort of cordoned off a certain segment of what I searched for after graduate school.
I think for me, coming out of grad school, I did interview at different places. All the places, though, wanted me to teach a lot, and they didn't really give me time to do research. And I knew I wanted to continue to do research post PhD, and so I needed an area where I can just focus strictly on research, or teach a class or two and still put a lot of time in research. But none of the positions that I applied for right after my PhD were able to offer me that. And so that's what made me want to decide to just go do a postdoc. And it's been good. That's why I recommend for people who want to continue doing research, I would recommend doing a postdoc. Or if you can find a position, that will allow you to do lots of research. But most generally don't, from what I've seen, well, at least as of last year. So yeah, I don't know. I think I answered the question. So but I am open to, I am open to other options. I just don't know many out there right now that are available. But primarily though, I like Danny was saying, I really don't want to like corporate things like that. I would prefer to do stuff where I can still do research And, you know, whatever positions out there, I'm open to it, but I haven't been able to see many.
Yeah, so my job search process for getting into the position that I am in now was weird and kind of, I'm not sure that I would recommend taking this approach, but I was, you know, looking for postdoc jobs primarily. And one of the things that was going on internally was I really didn't necessarily want to move away from Seattle, but didn't feel like I had like a reason I had to stay. And so that was definitely a challenge as I was looking for postdocs. And I thought about applying for other, you know, faculty positions right off the bat, and really felt like I needed some more experience to try and develop like my own research program so that I could write a nice research statement, submit it, and like clearly tell them what I wanted to do and how that was going to involve their students at their university, and you know how that's going to benefit what's already going on in their physics department or education department or something like that. And so after looking at those, I was kind of like, well, I think probably a postdoc is going to be the best thing, so I can like have a year or two to really figure out like what's my thing. And I would still really recommend that if you're feeling that way. And so then I started talking to SPU. I was like, I'm not sure I'm ready to move. I'm not sure I'm ready to like take on this whole big step. And they were looking for some postdocs. And so I was like, yeah, I think I'm interested. I was talking to them. And then like somewhere around like mid-March of last year, it was like a crazy situation where like everything was shutting down, and they're like, also, would you be interested in applying if this was going to be a tenure track position? And I was like, yeah, that doesn't happen very often, I think, but and like I wouldn't say that you should expect that to happen, and I don't really know what was going on behind that made it happen, but like I think the things that I would say that are generalizable about that is I really knew that this was going to be something like, ultimately this was in the direction of something I was really looking for, a smaller school where I could really get to interact with students that I was teaching. That was like a big one for me, is I knew that if I was going to be teaching in a classroom, I wanted to be in a situation where I could actually get to know the students. And so I knew that that was going to happen, and it was nice that it was in a place that I already knew I liked to live, and I already had friends and that kind of thing. And I think the third thing is like, because of the way the research I'm working on is structured, there's still a lot of mentorship from other more senior PER researchers. And so I'm not completely left on my own to figure out like what is my research thing. I still have some mentorship on getting grants and that kind of thing. So I think had all of those things not been there, I wouldn't have said yes, but I think I'm frozen.
It's good now.
Okay, sorry, I don't know where I froze in there.
No, we were able to listen to you all the time, just the video was frozen for a couple seconds.
It was just my face. Okay, well, great, perfect. Yeah, I think there was another part to that question though that I forgot to answer.
Yes, if you had to explore other career options besides academia.
Oh, yes. I, not very seriously, I didn't look at other options outside of academia, because I think, like Danny and Clausel said, I really wanted to be working with students. And in Seattle, it's always very tempting. Like with a PhD, you can probably market yourself to Mr. Bezos or Mr. Zuckerberg or Mr. Gates and make twice as much money pretty quickly. But I think that would have some significant drawbacks. So I haven't really considered that too seriously.
There was like, I NASA reached out to me maybe like a month ago, I think it was, but it was more like an outreach position where I didn't really do research. So it was like NASA Goddard. And so a lot of the positions, if you want to do something outside of academia, it's going to be tough. If you want to continue to do research, that is, it's going to be tough to find a gig in physics education, I should say. A lot of it's just more teaching or outreach or something like that. So that's from what I've seen. There could be something out there, but I'm not aware of it right now.
So I'll add to what Clausel said from the perspective of an advisor who's graduated students. So I've graduated 6 students. 5 of them have stayed in academia, as 4 of them as postdocs, 1 as an instructor. And the 6th one is exploring a wide variety of options, including industry and other research labs outside of education, because their experience is in doing a lot of heavy data mining and data science. And so their interest is more in that rather than the context of education. So they're marketing those skills to different places because they're more interested in that piece of the work, right? So I think kind of going back to what I think everyone has said, right, is like thinking about where you want to spend your time, right? And I think that sounds like the 3 of us have made similar decisions on that with regard to students or teaching.
Can you talk a little bit about what was involved in your application for your current position? And what was the process for you for writing a teaching statement, a research statement, and maybe an inclusion statement? Like, can I add there, like, what are the kind of things that current graduate students should be, thinking about when writing also those statements?
I don't know. I think maybe Lisa and Danny can go first, as y'all are professors. So.
I can say a little bit, I guess. So I applied, would have been 9 years ago, right? So things have changed a bit. I had a CV, a cover letter, a research statement, and a teaching statement. That was it. That was all MSU required at the time. That's all every school that I applied to required at the time. And the advice that was given to me, and the advice that I continue to give to folks, is that, you have to sort of tailor what you want to do and how you present yourself and how you present your skills to the institution that you're applying. And that means doing homework, right? It means not only just, knowing that, let's say Michigan State is a research intensive university, but knowing that there are offices and programs on campus that can support the work that you're doing and calling those specific things out.
Yeah, so for me, when I applied, there was a teaching statement and a diversity statement. And because I was applying to mostly a teaching college, there's not a research statement. There were also CV and cover letter and that kind of thing. But because I was applying in a more like research centered role, I had to make sure, or I felt like I had to make sure that I was really incorporating my research stuff into both the teaching statement and the diversity statement. And particularly talking about how my research was going to be like incorporating undergraduate researchers and giving them mentorship in doing research. That was a big thing for a couple of jobs that I applied for at more teaching focused schools or undergraduate institutions. They really wanted to know how my research program was going to provide opportunities for undergraduates to be involved in research. And my process for doing this was a little bit haphazard, but what I did is I started a Google blog that was only accessible to myself, and I would just like blog about things that I thought were relevant for research or teaching or diversity statements. And I did that for about a year before I applied to the job. And then there was a lot of work in like compiling all of that stuff into a coherent, readable document, but it was really helpful to have started on that and kind of have gotten my thoughts out before I felt like a lot of pressure to write it in a certain amount of time. Yeah, and then the CV, I just asked my advisor and everyone else I worked with if I could look at their CV, and because I was really stressed out about the formatting of it. And everybody's looks different, but that was helpful to have a template to go by.
Well, since I'm in a postdoc position, I didn't have to create a diversity statement, but I didn't have to even create a teaching statement for my position I'm in now. So basically, I just wrote sort of a research statement, basically describing what aspects of the project that I would be interested in and why. What about my previous experience during my PhD program that will contribute to the project intellectually. So I had to talk about that in a research statement. For other jobs I did apply and that were interviewed, most were instructional positions. I did have to develop a teaching statement, talking about how I would be inclusive in my teaching, how I would reach out to underrepresented students within the teaching statement, and what types of techniques, what types of strategies I would use in the classroom, how available I would be as an instructor, what types of technology I would use, and how would that effectively help the students. And so those are the things I put into my teaching statement for other positions.
Can you talk a little bit about how you prepared for interviews for the positions that you are now and the other career options that you explored in and outside of academia? What sort of questions should an applicant expect and be prepared to talk about? Both in Zoom interviews and the more extensive where you present.
Well, I guess I can go first. There is like a website I went to when I interviewed. See, I did the interview at the University of Washington on Zoom because that's when COVID started, basically. And then, well, it wasn't going to be in person. Let me tell you that. It wasn't even going to be in person regardless. So, but it was over Zoom. And then I did another interview. I did 2 other interviews at different universities before COVID. And so I had a list of questions to ask in terms of funding, in terms of the tenure process or promotion process in my case, because it was an instructor's position, what types of resources were given to me, will be given in terms of just, budgets, in terms of maybe going to conferences, in terms of materials, whatever the case is. I also had questions to ask, the department chair in terms of what's sort of the vision of the department in terms of like what are they trying to see the department in maybe years from now. For my postdoc, I had questions about the grant proposal that was given. So I had like maybe 20, 30 questions I was ready to ask. I sent them the questions, the PIs the questions in advance, so they will have answers for them. And that just lets them know that I'm very interested in the project and I'm trying to learn about the project. And I want to see, where I fit in and how I can contribute. And so those 2 ways, those are the ways I prepared for the interviews. Now, with the online interview is pretty straightforward. It's not like you're face to face with the people, but the in-person interviews, I recall, it was an all-day thing. It was like 2 days, I think. And basically every hour I had to meet a different faculty member. Lunchtime, maybe a faculty member took me to lunch. Dinner time, another faculty member took me to lunch. And then at the end, maybe on the second day, I had to do a mock teaching of the class. And then all the people, as many professors in the department that came could come, they came to watch to see how it was. They gave me feedback after the presentation and told me, what I did well, what I may need to improve. And so it was, it was a 2-day straight, constant, in and out of meetings and stuff like that with professors. And so you have to be very prepared for that, I would say, particularly with the in-person interviews, because, they're going to be watching your moves and seeing how you're going to react to certain things. And you're trying to check them out and see how they are. And so I would say, particularly for in-person interviews, you have to be very prepared, be very, just watch out for all things, I would say, for in-person interviews.
So for me, for my current job, I interviewed entirely via Zoom because it was last spring. And one resource that I used for a lot of this process, both the like writing statements and the interview process, preparing for that, was a book called The Professor Is In by Karen Kelsky. Someone recommended it to me, and so I got it. And I will be honest and say some of the writing I found a little bit stressful because a lot of it comes across as like, here's this thing that you're gonna want to do, don't do that. And that's helpful, but also made me feel like, oh my gosh, this is an insurmountable obstacle, but you can do it. It's okay. It does have very helpful, like almost like sentence starter type things for writing research statements, coming up with interview questions, preparing for those. And it gave me a lot of insight into the process. That was really helpful in the end. The other thing I did is talked to folks in the department who are not part of the hiring process and just asked them about their interview process and what people were looking for or what specific things I might talk about. I also talked to, some other like mentors and advisors I had, particularly about like once I had been offered the job, the salary negotiation process. I was very, very worried about this, have never done that before. And I asked everyone and their mom what they did with that. And that ended up being a lot of work, but really helpful in the end. I weirdly I did not have to do a teaching interview or teaching demonstration for my job, which normally I think they would have had me do. But it was the like transition to remote online teaching, and I think nobody really wanted to deal with that. And also, I should have mentioned this earlier, I had adjuncted at SPU as a graduate student, and so there were some people who already had seen me teach there. So had I had to do the teaching demonstration, I definitely would have practiced on my research colleagues beforehand, maybe any other random person who would listen to me as well. And I have been the person who people have practiced teaching interviews on before as well. And I think that's really helpful.
Yeah, so I'll maybe just add a little bit more. So my postdoc interviews were very different from each other. And so I guess I might say expect them to vary a bit because it depends on the institution and there's not really some normalization. So, one of them, the person just contacted me and said, can you fly up on Monday and fly back Monday night to a large, northeastern city? And I said, sure. But it didn't work to fly out that morning and fly back that night. So I flew back the next morning, but the interview started at like noon. The person showed up to interview me at 3, and I kept interviewing with that person until 1 in the morning. So that was odd. And clearly a trigger for not taking this job, even though it was offered to me like as I left. One of the other ones I went on was a kind of a more normal visit with the group, but the seminar involved, it was like a 3-hour seminar. So I gave a seminar and then just like was asked questions for 2 hours. And then one of the other ones I went on involved teaching demonstrations because they were for positions at 2-year colleges. Those were very much, I think, the way that sort of I think Lisa and Klaus all described it. You meet with a bunch of people and like there's some event in the middle where you're teaching maybe or doing something and people are evaluating you, and you meet with everybody in the department or everybody in the college, depending on how big the institution is. You may meet with the dean, you may not, because if the institution's bigger or smaller. And then the Colorado interview that I did, I just got a phone call while I was at the zoo and they interviewed me on the phone. So I had no time to prep. But then they invited me out. So then I had time to prep. And so I would definitely like echo what Lisa said about the book the professor is in. I think that's a good one. There's another book called A PhD is Not Enough. Not a great book for education research. It's written in a very, I'm a physical scientist and here's how you become a good physical scientist researcher. But it does have pieces in it that are really kind of useful in terms of thinking about like, what are the skills that you want to play up in different places. Okay, so just stepping back for a sec. So I've also been on search committees for various things, whether those are for postdocs or faculty positions. And so there's a few things I think are worth saying. So like, one is you want to know your agenda as soon as they can get it to you, right? So like whoever you're interviewing with, you want to really try to make sure that they've committed to a list of the people that you're going to visit, when things are going to happen, what those things are, because that gives you opportunities to do research, right? If you know that you're going to meet with a dean from this college, you can start looking into what this dean is interested in, right? And have some things that are mutual discussion points, right? You don't want to go into a meeting with someone not able to talk to them about what you're doing in the way that they may care or understand about it, right? And especially when it comes to hiring for faculty positions, being able to talk to chairs and deans about your contributions and your vision for the department if they hire you is really critical. So knowing who you're going to meet is important. The other thing is there are things that they absolutely cannot ask you about, but because we are in a sexist, racist culture and in many physics departments with a lot of faculty who don't understand that they're not supposed to do those things. People cannot ask about your relationship status. They cannot ask about whether you're pregnant or not. They cannot ask about medical history, et cetera, political affiliations. These are all protected by federal law, and yet you are still often asked about them. So know that you don't have to answer those questions, and know that and develop a way to sort of politely move the conversation on, I guess. You want to know that that's a situation that you're going to be running into when you're applying for that job, but you also don't want to sink your potential at taking a job because it's actually maybe the best position for you given your other options, right? So like thinking about how to handle that situation is good.
If you have already hired people, what are the qualities or things that you look for people that you're looking to hire? Or if you haven't been yet through this process, what would you like to look in a candidate, whether it is a postdoctoral position or a faculty position?
Yeah, I'm gonna have to yield to people who've hired someone before, so I can't speak on that.
I could speak on it. I don't know, Lisa, can you talk about hiring people?
You can go first.
Okay, fair enough. So I've hired a number of postdocs for different kinds of positions, and I've been on hiring committees for instructors and for tenure stream faculty in different positions as well. And so I would say for postdoc positions, the group has a lot more control over what they're looking for. So because you're usually hiring for a specific kind of project and you're looking for certain kinds of expertise. And so a lot of times it's really project dependent. So when you're reading the call, right, you really want to look for like the key responsibilities or the key skills or whatever that are listed in the call, because those are going to tell you what folks are really looking for. So at what we do with all of our calls is try to have a section that we indicate as key things that we want the person to be able to do, right? What a successful candidate would do. And those are actually the rubric things that we look for when we look at applications. So we basically just use that as our checkboxes, right? And then we look at everybody who has all of the checkboxes, all the checks filled out, and say, okay, well, we'll interview those folks that all have all the checks out, right? But it is very project dependent, right? That's the one thing that is different from, like, say, a faculty position where you are saying, like, I want broader expertise. I don't really care too much about which specific area, because they're supposed to make their case to me, right, why they are a good fit for this institution. But then the broad categories of things you look for are like the potential for at a research institution would be like the potential to attract funding, the potential to attract graduate students, their experiences with mentoring, their experiences with teaching, their experiences with national or statewide service, right? So all the things that sort of are check boxes for the institution to get you tenure, right? We are looking for progress towards that, right? Like a trajectory that demonstrates those competencies when we're looking to invite somebody to interview for a faculty position. And those will be different based on the institution. I'm sure there's certainly very different between MSU and say Seattle Pacific, where the emphasis might be more on the community and teaching and mentoring of undergraduates, where ours would be more on bringing in grant funding and writing papers and mentoring PhD students.
Yeah, I have pretty limited hiring experience, but I have been able to be kind of part of the like faculty hiring experience for a couple of other faculty members in the STEM fields this year. And like the thing I would say to build on what Danny was saying, I think folks are looking for that trajectory and showing that you are kind of on your way towards those tenure criteria, which brings out an important point is when you are interviewing for a job, it's a very good idea both for yourself and for your like marketing of yourself to know early on what the tenure criteria are as best you can. And often those are published online. You can just ask somebody where you can find them. For my university, at least, a lot of the conversation after seeing someone's interview or teaching interview especially is, does their teaching fit with this, like the kind of teaching that's happening in the department already? And so I think for physics education research students, like you have a really big strength here because you have probably a kind of a broad knowledge of different research-based teaching approaches, and you can use that to kind of figure out what's going on in the department already and tailor your teaching interview to that. But I think for me, a lot of the conversation has been like, this person seems like they really know their stuff, but it's going to be really hard for them to integrate with the kind of courses that we're already teaching, or they're probably going to not be super supportive of us, having more active teaching or, other things like that. This person seems like they're applying for an engineering position, but teaching a physics course or something like that. I think the only other thing I would add is if I were hiring a postdoc, a big thing that I would be looking for is somebody who is very clear on what their goals are and what they want to or feel capable of taking charge of.
Yeah, Faisal, I wanted to ask if you have anything to add on this.
Not for this particular question, no.
In your perspectives, what should graduate students be doing now if they're interested in a career in academia? Based on your experience, like what worked for you? How important, for example, is networking? And what were some things that really helped you in your grad school that got you in the place that you're today?
Well, I think for me, just understanding what you want to do post graduate school in terms of research, that definitely helped me out. Networking definitely helped me out also. Coming to the conferences like AAPT, PERC. You can also reach out to the faculty who share your research interest to see if the faculty has any potential openings for postdocs, or even if the university has any positions open for faculty or teaching, or well, if you want to go that route, if you want to do it as instructor route. So definitely in terms of just understanding what you want to do, network, and also writing. Obviously, you want to start thinking, preparing yourself as a writer, because you're going to be constantly writing, trying to publish. And so, get that, start doing that more as you're going towards post-graduate school. I think those are the three things for me that would help.
I want to pick up on what Clausel said about writing, because I think one of the things from the sort of hiring perspective that I'm beginning to see, especially over time, is that historically, PER grad students may not have published a paper before finishing their PhD. 15 years ago, 20 years ago, they may have published one on the way out. I'm increasingly seeing more and more applicants with 3, 4, 5 publications when they finish their PhD. And these are like things that they collaborate on. These are like PERC papers. Some of them are even undergraduate like theses that got turned into papers, right? Like there's a, I think what's happening is that PER is catching up to physics in that sense. So in physics, undergraduates write papers and publish them quite often in laboratories. PhD students write a lot of papers. Postdocs are publishing many, many papers. Sometimes postdocs are having to do 2 postdocs to be, qualified for faculty positions. And so what I'm seeing, I think, is more and more earlier preparation, which means sort of more and more metrics that are being compared for people that are applying for jobs. And so going back to what Clausel was talking about, writing is often the currency of the academic field, right? Being a good writer, seeing a story in research is incredibly powerful and can be incredibly productive for a career in research. So finding resources to help you work on your writing, thinking about things that you're writing, putting things out there that aren't quite ready and seeing what happens if you get feedback. And, like you may have a smaller project that you have a good narrative for, try it out, right? So don't fear rejection from journals to try out your writing, I guess is what I'd say.
Then just a follow-up question. You mentioned earlier about a rubric that you use in hiring postdocs or faculty. I'm wondering when you're considering hiring postdocs, what are the things in the rubric that matter the most? Like, what are some qualities in a candidate or in an application that will differentiate like this candidate and make it more outstanding compared to everybody else? Because yeah.
That's a really great question, Diana. So I'd say most of the stuff that I've been involved with, whether those are faculty or postdoc interviews, it's usually a 2-stage process. So there's like a process of reading the applications and forming a list of folks that you're going to interview. And then there's the interviewing process. And so the thing that I think you really have a lot of control over is whether you move on from the large pool to the interview pool, right? And so that's where the rubric really comes into play, because it depends on the position. We may be looking for somebody who has, a substantial amount of experience in laboratories because we're doing a laboratory-based project, right? And so in that case, someone will really need to sell their experience designing laboratories or doing research in laboratories, or selling that their research could be done in laboratories. So people who may be interested in the experiences of Black women in physics, people who may be interested in studying practices or whatever, if you can take that narrative and say, I can see where my research fits into this project, that's a pretty strong statement, right? Rather than just saying, I just do this research. So I guess what I'm getting at is like, it's about tailoring it to the job and recognizing that, you do have something to bring to the table, even if it doesn't fit exactly, right? If you can see how it fits in, a lot of people are really interested in your novel ideas, right? And as a group, we often allow people a pretty substantial amount of time to do their own research, something like 20% of their time, 10% of their time to explore their own stuff. So coming with that is really nice.
Lisa, would you like to answer this question? Like your suggestion on what graduate students should be doing?
Yeah, I think just to echo what Danny and Clausel said about writing, I got a lot of support early on in my graduate school career to advocate for myself to do sort of a like 3-paper dissertation model, which was not typical for the University of Washington at the time. And Charlotte, if you're still on this call, you should advocate for that for yourself as well if you haven't already. And so that meant that I had like one publication that was already published and I was the first author, and a couple of PERC papers, and then one that was like in the review process, which actually has ended up being really great that it was in the review process, because then it got published this year and will count towards my tenure record later on, which is super great. The other thing, and like just to build on the writing thing, I think that, and like another part of the writing that you might be doing is, like I said, like just starting to write down, what are my own research ideas? What are the directions I want to take? How would I incorporate undergrads, or eventually supervise grad students, or like what's my teaching statement, that kind of thing. Just like doing some personal writing that is going to feed into job applications later. Clausel and I have been working through these professional development videos from the National Center for Faculty Development and Diversity, and they have this whole like 10-week boot camp that kind of, it's about aligning your time that you spend at work with your priorities and what you're ultimately going to be evaluated for. And as a grad student, like your ultimate goal is to like get a PhD, so write your thesis and defend it successfully, and then get a job afterwards. And so like the thing that you should be spending your time on is ultimately those things. And so your university might have a subscription to their like online platform, and you can watch these. The website is facultydiversity.org. Anyways, that was a really helpful resource for me this year. Wish I had known about it in grad school. But the main suggestion that they make, or one of them, is spending like 30 minutes at the beginning of your day just writing something that nobody else is holding you accountable for. Maybe that's like, I'm going to write this PERC paper, or I'm just going to blog about my teaching statement today, or something like that.
Again, a follow-up question on in this area. What advice would you give to students or postdocs who are in the job market on how to deal with rejection?
I don't necessarily know if I have the best advice. I mean, I just kind of dealt with it and just applied to the next position. I don't know how to, I never really got like emotionally, what should I say, disappointed or emotionally attached to a particular location, if that makes sense. So ironically, I'm trying to think to myself here. I've been rejected from like school, or had rejected papers before, but I don't even think I was rejected for a position. I think when I was applying for positions, I think COVID came, and so I never really got an official rejection. They just were like, we're going to stop looking for applicants now, or something like that, except for University of Washington and maybe one other place that offered me. But the rest were like, we're not going to continue the application process. So I never really had an official rejection, I think, because of the COVID situation. So I guess maybe I'm not necessarily the ideal person to ask this. Now that I sit back and think about it. So, yeah. But I can talk about being rejected from managed papers or journals or something like that. I can talk about that. That's happened several times. So, yeah.
I guess, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if I have a productive way of dealing with it, to be honest with you. Like, I don't know that I've gotten terribly emotionally invested in things, and rejection and disappointment are a regular part of my life on a daily basis. That's what's being an academic, getting rejected grant proposals and papers. And yeah, I mean, it's I think you need to normalize it a little bit, right? It's like, recognize that it's okay. It's not really a critique of you, right? It's a contextual thing that's driven by many forces that are not you. And I mean, I think the only, like, I mean, I guess I have a story, which is kind of funny. Like, the only reason I'm in PER is because I ended up at a bar in Austin because I got rejected from every graduate school that I applied to. And my best friend in undergrad, like, I was just at the bar drinking beers and eating cheese fries, and he showed up and was like, hey, I got into Georgia Tech after getting rejected from everywhere else because they're still taking students. And so like that day is the reason I'm here. I mean, in some sense, like I would not have. So like, I mean, I guess I take rejection in a slightly different light because it's just not, you never know, I think, what's going to happen.
Yeah, I don't know that I have any like really amazing advice other than to echo what Danny said about it being a contextual thing. It's not really about you, it's about like something about the interaction between you and the university that's just not the right fit, probably. And like maybe there's some things that you can learn that you can do better for next time, whether that's a paper, like something you can revise and resubmit and make it better. That's good. Maybe it's just like, no, like I'm not the right person for the job, or this is not the right job for me. But like, especially if you get your hopes up, oh, I was really excited to work with this person or live in this location, or it would have been like the perfect way to work out like both my partners and my jobs or whatever, like it kind of sucks. And that, I don't know, that's just it. It just is.
I think one other thing, just to add to what Lisa was saying, like applying for a job is like anything. It's a skill, right? You develop the ability to work within your own space of research and teaching to argue why you're a good candidate for something. And the problem is that the game and practice are the same. And so the opportunity to practice and get feedback outside of actually applying is something to really look for. Because when if the only time you're getting feedback on your application materials and how you're selling yourself to a job is when you apply, then right, you're playing the game and practicing at the same time. And so trying to find those other opportunities to hone that skill is important.
What other experience or advice do you have about careers in PR, based on people you know, based on your own experience, based on how you've been involved in recruitment?
It's a good question. I can say that the PER community tends to be pretty, I would say small. Well, it's gotten smaller for me in the sense of I feel like I'm getting to know more and more people, like get the same interactions from people. So I guess your network kind of gets smaller, if that makes sense. Meaning like, not less people, but you tend to run into people that you know quite a bit more often, um, as go forward in your career. And so that's helpful in terms of, if there's something happens at one job, you know some people that may know some other people that can get you another job. So the network it's a pretty close knit network. And so, so networking is very important. Understanding, where you are in your career, where you want to be, and understanding the steps that you need to get there. That's very important. I think just understanding that, okay, with the academic process, like Danny was saying, failure is kind of normalized in a sense. Don't necessarily get discouraged. Don't necessarily get discouraged with regards to getting critical feedback, maybe on a proposal or on a manuscript. It's just a part of the process, and it's just a way to get yourself better, and you can constantly improve to work on your writing, work on your research, work on your data analysis skills, etc. And so that would be the advice I would give.
I guess, oh, go ahead, Lisa, go ahead.
Oh, okay. I think that a piece of advice that I received pretty early on in my like grad school or maybe even undergraduate career, from a mentor was to take advantages of the opportunities that are put in front of you. And I think that my like job search story is like a very like it's an example of that. And I would say like that's been a really productive thing for me to do is when somebody is like, hey, you want to do this thing, just to say yes. Now, like asterisk there is you can only say yes to so many things. And by saying yes to those things, you're going to be saying no to other things. So choose wisely. But, you know, give it some consideration. A shameless plug, but not unbiased, is join things like PERCoGS, where you get to know people, and like that's a great, like, I am a former PERCoGS officer for many years, so that's like one of the biggest ways I got to know the PER community, and so that was really helpful for me as well.
Yeah, so I would agree with what Lisa said. You know, sort of taking up different opportunities that are available to you when they align with what you want to do is really good. Because there's a lot of different skills you may develop. There's a lot of different people you may interact with, and all of those things are useful. I think one of the more interesting things is in the next year, there's going to be a substantial increase in the available federal money for STEM education. The Congress just passed this competitiveness act that infuses something like 20 or 25% more budget for NSF and DOE and NIH. And that means that if that money is distributed, you know, equally, it probably won't be, but if it were, right, what you would see is maybe 20% more awards for STEM education research and maybe additional budgets, right? And that suggests that there'll be more growth of the field. It may mean that there's more universities that are willing to invest in hiring somebody because the opportunities for them to get awarded funding are higher. It also does mean that there may be a strain on positions as they lag the funding, right? So we may have more positions available than available graduates. May not be able to meet that. The other way could potentially be true too, right? Is that we have too few positions for as many people as we graduate, but I don't know that we're there yet. But anyway, I mean, I guess what I'm getting at is like, I see a lot of growth still in the next few years. And so I would say keeping your eyes out for those kinds of opportunities, both postdoctoral and predoctoral, because I suspect there will be a lot more of those opportunities as a result of this federal money.
Let's hope so, that there will be more opportunities. Does anybody else have any questions that you would like to ask our panelists? I'm sorry, it's my allergies are kicking in. So I want to thank everybody. This was a wonderful discussion. And thank you again so much for being here and for sharing all these experiences and this very valuable advice that you had with us.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.